What if I told you that the moment you stop chasing them is the moment they start to unravel? What if silence, not anger, not closure, not confrontation, was the one thing they feared the most? You gave everything, your trust, your energy, your soul, and they made you feel like it was never enough. Until one day, you stopped answering. And in that quiet, they heard something louder than any words you ever spoke. They heard freedom. This is the story of what happens when the narcissist realizes you're never coming back. Not to punish, not to prove, but because you finally remembered who you are. If you're in this situation, or if you've ever been, leave a like. And if you feel ready, share your story, or simply write "thank you" in the comments. You're not alone. And now, it's time to take your power back. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." If you've ever been entangled with a narcissist, this quote hits hard, because what you thought was love, passion, connection, safety, was often just a projection, a crafted illusion, perfectly designed to reflect back what you long to see. And here's the truth that most people learn too late. The narcissist never expects you to leave. Not really, especially not on your terms. When you finally do, when you go silent, disappear, detach without begging or explaining, you do something that hits deeper than any confrontation ever could. You shatter their illusion of control, and neuroscience proves it. Dr. Antonio Damasio, a pioneer in neuropsychology, discovered that emotional decision-making, like the decision to walk away from an emotionally manipulative relationship, activates the prefrontal cortex and overrides the amygdala, the fear center. In narcissists, studies show the amygdala is overactive, particularly when faced with rejection or loss of control. That means your quiet exit doesn't just hurt their ego. It triggers a neurological crisis. Freud called this narcissistic injury. It's not heartbreak, it's a collapse of their false self. Because narcissists don't build identity from within, they feed on mirrors. They need your reactions, your praise, even your anger. Anything that tells them, "I exist because you see me." When you walk away and stop seeing them, stop reacting, that's the breaking point. For you, it's liberation. For them, it's annihilation. And here's something you've probably never been told. The moment you chose silence over explanation, absence over access, you activated one of the most ancient psychological weapons, unpredictability. A 2011 study from the University of Virginia found that emotional unpredictability increases obsession and anxiety in the person left behind. You become, paradoxically, more powerful in your distance than you ever were in your presence. That's what the narcissist never expected. They planned for your return. They left the door open. They crafted messages they never sent. They rehearsed manipulations they never got to deploy, because in their mind, they owned your storyline. But when you break that narrative, you don't just rewrite your life, you dismantle theirs. And still you wonder, why does it hurt so much if I was the one who left? Because trauma bonds don't dissolve just because you walked away. They dissolve when you stop replaying the same emotional patterns. Dr. Patrick Carnes, an expert in trauma bonding, found that intermittent reinforcement, the cycle of love bombing, devaluation, and reward, creates addiction pathways in the brain similar to cocaine. You weren't in love. You were neurologically hijacked. This is where Stoicism enters like a lifeline, not as a cold philosophy, but as a survival tool. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The narcissist's control was always external, attention, chaos, emotion. But your strength is internal. And now, finally, you're reclaiming it. The breaking point isn't just about leaving them. It's about facing everything they mirrored back to you and choosing to no longer believe it defines your worth. That moment, right there, is when the narcissist realizes they've lost not just your presence, but your permission. And without that, their entire illusion crumbles. Before moving on, leave a like and write "thank you" as a comment to anchor the change that's beginning inside you. There's a moment after the storm, after the chaos, the arguments, the endless explanations, when everything goes quiet. You stop replying, you stop defending, you stop playing the game. And in that silence, something powerful begins to happen. Not just to you, but to the narcissist. Neuroscience calls it the withdrawal effect. When someone is addicted to drama, attention, and control, silence isn't absence, it's deprivation. Dr. Helen Fisher, a biological anthropologist, discovered that emotional rejection activates the same areas of the brain as physical pain, specifically the anterior cingulate cortex. This means when you go silent, you're not just ignored, you're felt like a wound. But here's where it gets fascinating. Silence is not passive, it's strategic. It's one of the most active choices you can make in the aftermath of narcissistic abuse. The Stoics knew this. Epictetus taught that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And when you choose not to react, when you retreat into stillness instead of chaos, you regain control over something they never wanted you to realize you had: your mind. The narcissist's world is built on noise, validation, conflict, the constant hum of emotional reaction. When that stops, it creates what psychologists call a narcissistic void, a space where their false self, which relies on external reflection, begins to disintegrate. But here's the part no one talks about. They don't show it, at least not right away. On the surface, they may act unaffected, posturing, silent treatment, fake smiles. But behind the mask, your silence becomes unbearable. It forces them to hear what you're no longer saying. And that, ironically, is deafening. In 2015, researchers at Columbia University found that silent responses in emotionally charged situations increased stress responses in the brain more than direct confrontation. That's because silence removes predictability. It creates uncertainty. And for the narcissist, who thrives on control, uncertainty is terrifying. You're no longer feeding the cycle. No more highs and lows. No more energy to extract. Just absence. And absence creates questions. Did I lose control? Are they moving on? Did I matter at all? And yet, the more they try to provoke a reaction, the more silence answers for you. It's not just a boundary, it's a mirror. Because silence reflects everything they didn't want to see in themselves: insecurity, fear, powerlessness. In this void, the narcissist is forced to face something far more dangerous than your anger, your indifference. And this is where Stoicism turns silence into strength. Seneca wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." And after abuse, silence is not weakness, it's resistance, it's clarity, it's healing. You may doubt yourself in the beginning. You may want to send that message, answer that call, explain just one more time. But remember this, silence isn't just the absence of words, it's the presence of power. When you go silent, you're not disappearing, you're becoming louder than ever. Because the one thing the narcissist cannot manipulate is the void you leave behind when you stop playing their game. Control. That was always the currency. Not love, not partnership. Control. From the very beginning, everything was carefully calibrated. The attention, the affection, the cold withdrawal, the confusing silences, the unexpected kindness. It wasn't random, it was conditioning. What psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the same method used to train animals and, as it turns out, people. Dr. B.F. Skinner, one of the founding fathers of behavioral psychology, discovered that humans respond most strongly to unpredictable rewards. Not knowing when you'll get affection is more addictive than receiving it consistently. That's how the narcissist kept you hooked. But the moment you stepped away, truly stepped away, the system began to collapse. And collapse is the right word. Narcissists build an entire identity on what others reflect back to them. In psychology, it's called a false self. It's fragile, shaky, dependent. When that mirror breaks, when you stop reflecting back their illusion of superiority, desirability, and control, something unravels. Clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula explains it clearly. The narcissist isn't emotionally self-sustaining. They lack object constancy, the ability to maintain an emotional bond with someone even when they're not physically present. So when you go no contact, or even when you show indifference, you're not just removed, you're erased. And to the narcissist, that feels like ego death. What follows is a psychological crisis they can't show, but can't escape. On the outside, they may overcompensate. New relationship, perfect photos, sudden success. But all of it is a scramble to regain what they lost. Control. Control over the narrative, over how others perceive them, over how you remember them. Meanwhile, on the inside, studies show a dramatic rise in emotional dysregulation. A 2018 study published in the Journal of Personality Disorders found that individuals with narcissistic traits exhibit intense rage and anxiety when faced with abandonment or ego threat. This is not sadness. This is panic, masked as pride. The Stoics understood this collapse. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke." But the narcissists never learn to revoke their own illusions. That's why they need you, not as a person, but as a prop. And when you take yourself out of the script, you force them to confront the one thing they avoid at all costs, themselves. What follows is what Jung called the shadow, all the parts of the self we deny, reject, or disown. Narcissists live disconnected from that shadow, but when control vanishes, the shadow leaks through. That's when you may see irrational behaviors, smear campaigns, desperate contact, manipulative kindness, even rage masked as indifference. Because the mask is slipping, and beneath it, there's not a grand mastermind, just a scared child who never grew up. Here's the secret no one tells you. Their crisis is not your responsibility. Their collapse is not your job to fix. You may feel guilt. You may still have empathy. That's human. But don't confuse empathy with obligation. Your withdrawal didn't break them. It simply revealed what was already broken. And that revelation, that unraveling, is the beginning of your freedom. Because when their need for control collapses, something else begins to rise, your clarity. Ryan Holiday, best-selling author of The Daily Stoic, once said, "The obstacle is the way." It sounds poetic until you realize how literal it is. After narcissistic abuse, your mind becomes the battlefield. You're haunted by what was said, what was taken, what was never real. But here's what most people don't realize. Healing isn't about time. It's about structure. It's about what you practice every single day. Let's start with the science. In a 2017 study published in Frontiers in Psychology, researchers found that people who practiced Stoic reflection and journaling exhibited significantly higher emotional regulation and lower anxiety levels. That's not philosophy, that's neuroscience. Stoic principles activate the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self-control, rationality, and decision-making. And that's exactly what the narcissist tried to fracture in you. When you were in that relationship, you were trained, unconsciously, to live in reactivity. Highs, lows, praise, punishment. Now, your brain is rewiring, but it needs fuel, and Stoicism gives it exactly that. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal, war, and death. He ruled Rome during a plague that killed millions, and yet he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not detachment, it's discipline. The kind of discipline you build not by ignoring your emotions, but by observing them without obeying them. Right now, your mind may still echo their voice, their judgment, their manipulation. That's normal. But here's what changes everything. You don't need their validation to be whole. You never did. And every day you live without it, you weaken the chains they left in your nervous system. Dr. Judith Herman, a trauma recovery specialist, explains that the first stage of recovery is safety, emotional safety, which begins with self-trust. And self-trust begins with self-command, learning to respond instead of react. That's where Stoicism becomes a weapon. Let's get practical. Every time you feel that old fear, that panic to reply, to justify, to seek approval, pause, breathe, ask, is this within my control? That one question taken directly from Epictetus rewires your power, because it reminds you, you are not at the mercy of your past. You are the author of your perception now. And the more you practice that pause, the more untouchable you become. This isn't abstract. A Harvard Medical School study in 2020 showed that mindfulness-based self-observation rewires the default mode network, the brain's storytelling center, reducing intrusive memories and self-critical thoughts. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They called it the view from above, zooming out to see your life not as a victim, but as a strategist. You're not rebuilding from nothing. You're rebuilding from the ashes of illusion, stronger, smarter, calmer. And unlike the narcissist, who needs an audience to feel real, you're learning to stand alone, not lonely, just complete. You're no longer driven by revenge. You're driven by return, not to them, but to yourself. And that return will not be loud or dramatic. It will be still, focused, unshakable. You don't need closure. You need clarity. You don't need to be understood. You need to understand yourself. Because once you do, once you truly grasp the power of emotional sovereignty, the narcissist no longer has any entry point. You've become emotionally untouchable, not by building walls, but by mastering your mind. And that's something no one can ever take from you again. They thought you would come back. They always do. That was the plan. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but eventually. Because they believed they had installed a piece of themselves inside your identity. They fed it with just enough doubt, just enough hope, just enough confusion to make you think that leaving them meant leaving something essential. That's how deep the manipulation runs. But something changed. You didn't come back. And what happens next? That's something they never prepared for. Let's start with what the research says. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Affective Disorders found that individuals with high narcissistic traits experience intense internal disintegration when long-term supply is cut off. The researchers observed emotional chaos, depression, even sudden identity crises. Why? Because for narcissists, control equals self-worth. And when that control is gone, completely, finally, without warning, the ego implodes. They scan their messages, replay old conversations, scroll your profiles, pretend not to care. But deep down, a new reality sets in. You're not watching anymore. And that absence hits harder than any words ever could. This is where the illusion begins to starve. You're no longer a character in their drama. You're no longer responding to their bait. You're no longer making their existence real through your reactions. The narcissist begins to lose shape because their identity was never built for solitude, only reflection. And without your reflection, they fade. And here's the truth. Your silence is now sacred. It's the shrine of every time you almost gave in, every time you almost replied, every time you almost explained yourself again. But you didn't. And that didn't just protect your peace. It rewrote your narrative. In the words of Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor and neurologist, between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space, that silence, that is where you chose not to return, not because you're bitter, but because you're awake. The narcissist may reach out, not because they miss you, but because they miss control. You'll be tested. They'll play the role you once fell for. They'll cry, accuse, pretend, perform, but none of it is real. It's only a test of whether the old version of you is still alive. But that version, the one who doubted, who waited, who hoped for change, is gone. You buried them with dignity. You didn't return because you finally realized there's nothing left to return to. Just an echo chamber of your old wounds. And now, your life begins. Not the survival phase, not the healing phase, but the phase where you no longer define yourself by what you escaped, but by what you're building. You're not someone who got away. You're someone who chose. You saw the cycle, you saw the damage, and you walked, not just out of their world, but into your own. That decision may go unnoticed by the world. It may be quiet, private, but it is, in truth, the loudest statement of self-worth you've ever made. You didn't come back. And in doing so, you became someone they can never touch again, not because they lost you, but because they never truly had you. You've reclaimed what was always yours, your peace, your voice, your presence. And now, you don't need to prove your worth to anyone who questioned it. That's what happens when you don't return. You win.